Watch the eyes of a NASCAR veteran the moment a bloke like Shane Van Gisbergen or Cam Waters fills their mirrors on a road course. That's not respect, that's fear. And here's the part nobody in Charlotte wants to say out loud. It isn't just talent, it's a technical blueprint, a way of driving that was forged on a mountain in New South Wales, one that most American stars have literally never been allowed to learn because the machinery that teaches it was banned from their sport years ago. They're not slow because they're not trying. They're slow because they were raised soft. Their cars did the hard work for them. Today we pull the whole thing apart, the spool, the footwork, the drop-off Skyline, and I'll show you exactly why the mountain builds a driver that Daytona simply can't. Let's start under the car because this is where the story really lives. The Supercars Gen3 Mustang and Camaro run a spool, not a differential, a spool, and you need to understand what that actually means because it's the whole game. And a differential lets your two driven wheels rotate at different speeds through a corner. Inside wheel spins slower, outside spins faster, and the car turns sweetly. Comfortable, forgiving. A spool locks both rear wheels together solid, permanently, same speed always, no matter what the corner is asking for. So when an Aussie driver turns into a corner, the car fights them. The locked rear wants to push straight on, to understeer, to run wide and into the fence. Physics is actively working against the steering wheel. Now here's the bit that separates the good from the great. To make a spool car rotate, you don't ask the front end to do it. You use the throttle and the brakes to unstick the rear and pivot the whole car on its axis. You're provoking a slide, catching it, and driving through it every single corner all day long. Supercars has run a spool for decades. It's tradition, it's brutal, and it's genius because it manufactures drivers who are absolute masters of rotation. They don't drive a car around a corner. They throw it and tame it. And NASCAR? The next-gen car runs a differential, a proper speed differentiating diff. It turns and it behaves. Some Cup drivers have openly said a diff makes the car nicer to drive, which is exactly the problem. Nice doesn't build the reflex. Now move your eyes to the footwell because it gets worse for the Americans. The Gen 3 supercar kept a traditional stick shift, a clutch, an H-pattern gearbox, which means to downshift into a corner without locking the rears or unsettling that already hostile spool, the driver has to heel and toe. If you don't know it, you're hard on the brake with one foot, and with the same foot you roll onto the throttle to blip the revs, matching engine speed to the lower gear, all while your left foot works the clutch. 3 inputs, 2 feet at 250 kilometers an hour, staring down a corner where the mountain falls away in front of you. That's real pedal box work. That's the dark art. Supercars deliberately kept it. Officials said the shift and the heel and toe footwork is part of the spectacle part of what makes their driver a driver. Meanwhile, over in the Cup Series, the next-gen car brought in a 5-speed sequential, straight-line gearbox. You can bang down through the gears without even touching the clutch. No blip, no dance, no penalty for getting your feet wrong because there's barely any footwork left to get wrong. So think about what that means for muscle memory. An Australian's brain has 10,000 laps of managing a locked rear and matching revs by hand simultaneously. The American's brain has been handed a car that forgives both. But here's what I can't stop thinking about. There is one specific corner on Mount Panorama, just one, that taught SVG the exact skill he used to win on debut in the streets of Chicago. Most people guess the wrong one. I'll tell you which it is in about 90 seconds and why it's basically a cheat code for American street courses. Mount Panorama is 6.2 kilometers and it climbs and drops something like 170-odd meters across a lap. This is not a racetrack. It's a road over a mountain that they happen to race on. Public roads the rest of the year, cambers, bumps, patched surfaces, concrete walls a hand's width off the racing line. Now the section you need to know, you blast up mountain straight, you crest at Skyline to the highest, most exposed point, and then the road just falls out from under you into the dipper. It compresses. It kinks. The car goes light over the crest and then slams into the compression at the bottom, all while the walls squeeze in and you're turning. Look at that brake trace. And on the left, Bathurst The driver is modulating pressure through the compression because if you're hard on the brakes, when the car goes light over Skyline, you lock a wheel and you're into the fence. On the right, a US high-banked oval, smooth, loaded, predictable, the banking doing half the work of holding the car down. That's the contrast that matters. American stars grew up on smooth banked ovals where the track helps you. The Aussie grew up on a surface that's actively trying to buck him off the mountain. And that corner from earlier, it's Skyline into the dipper. The skill of managing a car that goes light and unloaded over a crest, then instantly nailing brake and throttle as the surface heaves back up. That is exactly the skill of a bumpy, walled-in street circuit. Chicago's streets weren't a new challenge for Van Gisbergen. They were Tuesday. He'd been driving a rougher, meaner version of that his whole career. He won on debut in 2023 because the streets of Chicago, to him, were a gentler mountain. Quick word, and I'll keep it honest, because you're not here for fluff. We're building the most technically literate racing community on YouTube. If you're tired of surface-level commentary that he's just a good driver nonsense and you want the real physics of the Australian invasion, join the NASCAR Nation Decoded crew by hitting subscribe. That's the whole ask. Now, back to the part where NASCAR starts to sweat. Here's where it gets political. Every time an outsider dominates a discipline, the whispers start about whether the rules should change. And there's a live debate in the paddock right now about the diff versus the spool and about shifting. Some Cup drivers reckon the diff should stay. Others think the car's gone too soft and too easy. Now, let me be careful and fair here because this is where channels lose the plot. I've seen no evidence NASCAR is writing rules specifically to nobble the Australians. That's rumor, not fact. But the conversation about the character of the car, how much it should forgive, how much it should demand of a driver, that conversation is absolutely happening. And here's the uncomfortable question underneath it. When a road course specialist shows up and embarrasses the field, is the instinct to make the car harder to reward skill, or is it to keep the car easy so the gap between the specialist and the regulars doesn't get exposed every single road weekend? Is that leveling the field, or is it hiding the gap? Because the two look identical from the grandstand, and only one of them makes American drivers better. But there's one last thing the Blueprint gives them, and it's not in the gearbox or the diff. It's in the head. The Bathurst 1000 is 1,000 kilometers. 6+ hours, heat, no power, steering assistance to lean on the way a road car has it, a locked rear fighting you at every one of 100+ corners a lap, and a concrete wall waiting for one lapse in concentration over 6 hours. Drivers train for it like endurance athletes because the mental load never lets up. A standard NASCAR sprint is a different kind of hard. The traffic, the contact, the intensity of pack racing is genuinely brutal in its own right. But it is a sprint. The Bathurst driver has been conditioned to hold absolute precision in a hostile car for the length of a working shift, with the mountain punishing every millimeter of error. So when that driver arrives in the States and gets handed a forgiving car for a 2-hour road race, mentally, they've got margin to spare. That's the final secret. The Blueprint doesn't just build hands and feet, it builds a mind that treats hard as normal. Van Gisbergen kicked the door in. Waters is knocking on it in the Truck Series. The Blueprint is real, it's proven, and the pipeline from the mountain to the States is now wide open. So the only question left is, who's next? Who's the next Aussie invader that's going to make a Cup regular check his mirrors and swear? And here's my challenge to you, and I want the real answer, not the lazy one. Which U.S. track is the closest thing to Bathurst? Don't just say the name. Tell me why. Technically, the elevation, the surface, the corner that goes light. I'm reading the comments, and I'm looking for the single most technical answer in there. Prove you're part of this crew.